Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My name is Dr. Ayaz Afsa, and our topic today is Accounts and Ethnogenic Approach. The rationale of much of this lecture is located in the interpretive ethnographic paradigm, which attempts to view situations through the eyes of participants, to catch their intentionality and their interpretations of frequently complex situations, their meaning systems and the dynamics of interactions as it unfolds. This is related to the notion of thick description, a phrase coined by Geertz. The field of language and language use is vast, and to do justice to all of it here is the optimism of ignorance. Rather, I will attempt to indicate some important ways in which researchers can use accounts in collecting data for their research. So my lecture proceeds in several stages. First of all, I will set out the characteristics of the ethnographic or ethnogenic approach. Then I'll move on to set out procedures in eliciting, analyzing, and authenticating accounts. Then I will provide an introduction to handling qualitative accounts and their related fields of network analysis and discourse analysis. Next, I will provide an introduction to handling quantitative and qualitative accounts, and finally, I will review the strengths and weaknesses of ethnogenic approaches. Although each of us sees the world from our own point of view, we have a way of speaking about our experiences which we share with those around us. Explaining our behavior towards one another can be thought of as accounting for our actions in order to make them intelligible and justifiable to our fellow men. Thus saying, "I am terribly sorry, I didn't mean to bump into you," is a simple case of the explication of social meaning. For by locating the bump outside any planned sequence and neutralizing it by making it intelligible in such a way that it is not warrantable, it ceases to be offensive in that situation. So accounting for actions in those larger slices of life called social episodes is the central concern of a participatory psychology which focuses upon actors' intentions, their beliefs about what sorts of behavior will enable them to reach their goals, and their awareness of the rules that govern those behaviors. Studies carried out within this framework have been termed ethnogenic, an adjective which expresses a view of the human being as a person, that is, a plan-making, self-monitoring agent, aware of goals and deliberately considering the best ways to achieve them. Ethnogenic studies represent another approach to the study of social behavior, and their methods stand in bold contrast to those commonly employed in much of the educational research. So before discussing the elicitation and analysis of accounts, we need to outline the ethnogenic approach in more detail. This I will do by reference to the work of one of its foremost exponents, Ram Har, 1978, who identifies 5 main principles in the ethnogenic approach. They are the following. An explicit distinction is drawn between synchronic analysis, that is, the analysis of social practice and institutions as they exist at any one time, and diachronic analysis, that is, the study of the stages and the processes by which social practices and institutions are created and abandoned, changed and are changed. Neither type of analysis can be expected to lead directly to the discovery of universal social psychological principles or laws. In social interactions, it is assumed that action takes place through and doing intersubjective entities with meaning. The ethnogenic approach therefore concentrates upon the meaning system, that is, the whole sequence by which a social act is achieved in an episode. Consider, for example, the action of a kiss in the particular episode of leaving a friend's house, the passing out parade of Saint Cyr, and the meeting in the gardens of Gethsemane. The ethnic or ethnogenic approach is concerned with speech which accompanies action. That speech is intended to make the action intelligible and justifiable in accounting at the time. The speech is intended to make the action intelligible and justifiable in occurring at the time and the place it did in the whole sequence of unfolding and coordinated action. Such speech is accounting. Insofar as accounts are socially meaningful, it is possible to derive accounts of accounts. The ethnogenic approach is founded upon the belief that human beings tend to be the kind of person their language, their traditions, their tacit and explicit knowledge tell them they are. The skills that are employed in ethnogenic studies therefore make use of common sense understandings of the social world. As such, the activities of the poet and the playwright offer the ethnogenic researcher a better model than those of the physical scientists. So what are the characteristics of accounts and episodes? The discussion of accounts and episodes that now follows develops some of the ideas contained in the principles of the ethnogenic approach outlined above. We have already noted that accounts must be seen within the context of social episodes. The idea of an episode is a fairly general one. The concept itself may be defined as any coherent fragment of social life. Being a natural division of life, an episode will often have a recognizable beginning and an end, and the sequence of actions that constitute it will have some meaning for the participants. Episodes may thus vary in duration and reflect innumerable aspects of life. A student entering primary school, aged 7 and living at 11, would be an extended episode. A 2-minute television interview with a political celebrity would be another. The contents of an episode which interest the ethnogenic researcher include not only the perceived behavior such as gesture and speech, but also the thoughts, the feelings, and the intentions of those taking part, and the speech that accounts for those thoughts, feelings, and intentions must be conceived of in the widest connotation of the word. Thus, accounts may be personal records of the events we experience in our day-to-day lives, our conversations with neighbors, our letters to friends, our entries in diaries. Accounts serve to explain our past, present, and future-oriented actions. Providing that accounts are authentic, it is argued there is no reason why they should not be used as scientific tools in explaining people's actions. The account gathering method proposed by Brown and Syme, 1977, summarizes in the following way. So there are characteristics of accounts and episodes. Episodes account gathering. So there is a research strategy informants, but a research within research strategy. First of all, the informants. Definition of episode and role groups representing domain of interest, identification of exemplars, selection of individual informants. Second, account gathering situation. Establishing venue, recording the account, controlling relevance of account, authenticating account, establishing role of interviewer and interviewee, and post-account authentication. Then there is a transformation of accounts, provision of working documents, and data reduction techniques. And then the researcher's accounts, accounts of the account, summary, overview, interpretation. And then you have the control procedures on the right hand column, rationale for choice of episode and role groups, degree of involvement of potential informants, contact with individuals to establish motive for participation, competence, and performance. Then contextual effects of venue, appropriateness, and accuracy in documenting account, accounts agenda, negotiation and internal consistency, degree of direction, corroboration, and then transcription reliability, coda reliability, appropriateness of statistical and content analysis, and then description of research operations, explanatory scheme, and theoretical background. That is a blueprint or a plan or a design of ethnogenic data collecting and research method. It involves attention to informants. To begin with, this design begins with attention to informants, means the account gathering situation, the transformation of accounts and researchers' accounts, and it sets out control procedures for each of these elements. Then problems of eliciting, analyzing, and authenticating accounts are further illustrated in the following outlines of two educational studies. The first study is concerned with valuing among older boys and girls. The second is to do with the activities of pupils and teachers in using computers in primary classrooms. Kitwood developed an experience sampling method, that is a qualitative technique for gathering and analyzing accounts based upon tape-recorded interviews that were themselves prompted by the 15 situations listed in the next slide. So that was like this. Below are listed 15 types of situation which most people have been in at some time. So the students are asked, try to think of something that has happened in your life in the past year or so, or perhaps something that keeps on happening which fits into each of the descriptions. Then choose the 10 of them which deal with the things that seem to you to be most important, which cover your main interests and concerns and the different parts of your life. When we meet, we will talk together about the situations you have chosen. Try before and to remember as clearly as you can what happened, what you and others did, and how you yourself felt and thought. Be as definite as you can. If you like, write a few notes to help you keep the situation in mind. These 15 situations are when there was a misunderstanding between you and someone else or several others, when you got on really well with people, when you had to make an important decision, when you discovered something new about yourself, when you felt angry, annoyed, or resentful, when you did what was expected of you, when your life changed direction in some way, when you felt you had done something well, when you were right on your own with hardly anyone taking your side, when you got away with it or were not found out, when you made a serious mistake, when you felt afterwards that you had done right, when you were disappointed with yourself, when you had a serious clash of disagreement with another person, when you began to take seriously something that had not mattered much to you before. So in this study, the students were given these 15 situations and they were asked to write about any 10 what they felt in that situation. Because the experience sampling method avoids interrogation, so what I am doing here, how this type of situation and writing is different from a survey or a questionnaire. So here in this situation, the respondents are asked to write about their experiences, and when you have an experience-based sampling method, it is different from questionnaire type of sampling method, because experience sampling method avoids interrogation. The material which emerges is less organized than that obtained from a tightly structured interview. So successful handling of individual accounts therefore requires the researcher to know the interview content extremely well and to work toward the gradual emergence of tentative interpretive schemata, which he then modifies, confirms, or falsifies as the research continues. Kitwood identifies 8 methods for dealing with the tape-recorded accounts. The first 4 methods are fairly close to the approach adopted in handling questionnaires, and the rest are more in tune with ethnogenic principles that I have just discussed above. So what are those characteristics of accounts and episodes? Well, the first of all is the total pattern of choice, the frequency of choice of various items, permits some surface generalizations about the participants taken as a group. The most revealing analysis may be those of the least and most popular items. The second is similarities and differences. Using the same technique as in the first method, it is possible to investigate similarities and differences within the total sample of accounts according to some characteristics of the participants, such as their age, their sex, level of educational attainment, etc. Number 3, grouping items together. It may be convenient for some purposes to fuse together categories that cover similar subject matter and reduce them. Number 4, categorization of content. The content of a particular item is inspected for the total sample, and an attempt is then made to develop some categories into which all the material will fit. The analysis is most effective when 2 or more researchers work in collaboration, each initially proposing a category system independently and then exchanging views to negotiate a final category system. And number 5, tracing a theme. This type of analysis transcends the rather artificial boundaries which the items themselves imply. It aims to collect as much data as possible relevant to a particular topic, regardless of where it occurs in the interview material. The method is exacting because it requires very detailed knowledge of content and may entail going through taped interviews several times. Data so collected may be further analyzed along the lines suggested in the method number 4, that was categorization of content. Number 6, the study of omissions. The researcher may well have expectations about the kind of issues likely to occur in the interviews. When some of these are absent, that fact may be highly significant. The absence of an anticipated topic should be explored to discover the correct explanation of its omission. And number 7, reconstruction of a social life world. This method can be applied to the accounts of a number of people who have part of their lives in common. For example, a group of friends who go around together. The aim is to attempt some kind of reconstruction of the world which the participants share in analyzing the fragmentary material obtained in an interview. The researcher seeks to understand the dominant modes of orienting to reality, the conceptions of purpose, and the limits to what is perceived. And number 8, generating and testing hypotheses. New hypotheses may occur to the researcher during the analysis of the tape recordings. It is possible to do more than simply advance these as a result of tentative impressions. One can loosely apply the hypothetico-deductive method to the data. And this involves putting the hypothesis forward as clearly as possible, working out what the verifiable inferences from it would logically be, and testing these against the account data. Where these data are too fragmentary, the researcher may then consider what kind of evidence and method of obtaining it would be necessary for more thorough hypothesis testing. Subsequent sets of interviews forming part of the same piece of research might then be used to obtain relevant data. So in the light of the weaknesses in account gathering and analysis, Kit would suggest some safeguards which needs worth mentioning here. First of all, he calls for cross-checking between researchers as a precaution against consistent but unrecognized bias in the interviews themselves. Second, he recommends member tests, that is, taking hypotheses and unresolved problems back to the participants themselves or to people in similar situations to them for their comments. Only in this way can researchers be sure that they understand the participants' own grounds for action, since there is always the possibility that an obliging participant will readily confirm the researcher's own speculations. Every effort should be made to convey to the participant then one wants to know the truth as he or she sees it, and that one is as glad to be proved wrong as right. So, what are the characteristics of accounts and episodes? A study by Bliss and Cohen, 1990, used cross-checking as a way of validating the classroom observation records of co-researchers and member tests to authenticate both quantitative and qualitative data derived from teacher and pupil informants. Thus, in the case of cross-checking, the classroom observation schedules of research assistants and researchers were compared and discussed to arrive at definitive accounts of the range and duration of specific computer activities occurring within observation sessions. Member tests arose when interpretations of interview data were taken back to participating teachers for their comments. Similarly, pupil scores on certain self-concept scales were discussed individually with respondents in order to ascertain why children awarded themselves high or low marks in respect of a range of skills in using computer programs. Another technique that has been successfully employed in the analysis of qualitative data is described by its originators as systematic network analysis, Bliss, 1983. Drawing upon developments in artificial intelligence, Bliss and her colleagues employed the concept of relational network to represent the content and structuring of a person's knowledge of a particular domain. Essentially, network analysis involves the development of an elaborate system of categories by way of classifying qualitative data and preserving the essential complexity and subtlety of the materials under investigation. A notational technique is employed to generate network-like structures that show the interdependencies of the categories as they are developed. Network mapping is akin or related to cognitive mapping. So what makes a good network? So Bliss et al. 1983 point out that there cannot be one overall account of criteria for judging the merits of a particular network. They do, however, attempt to identify a number of factors that ought to feature in any discussion of the standards by which a network might fairly be judged as adequate. First, any system of descriptions needs to be valid and reliable. Valid in the sense that it is appropriate in kind and within that kind sufficiently complete and faithful, and reliable in the sense that there exists an acceptable level of agreement between people as to how to use the network system to describe data. Secondly, there are properties that a network description should possess such as clarity, completeness, and self-consistency. These relate to a further criterion of network utility, the sufficiency of detail contained in a particular network. A third property that a network should possess is termed learnability. Communicating the terms of the analysis to others, say the authors, is of central importance. It follows, therefore, that much hinges on whether networks are relatively easy or hard to teach to others. And a fourth aspect of network acceptability has to do with its testability. Bliss 83 identify two forms of testability. The first having to do with testing a network as a theory against data. The second with testing data against a theory or expectation via a network. And finally, the terms expressiveness and persuasiveness refer to qualities of language used in developing the network structure, and here the authors proffer the following advice. Helpful as the choice of an expression, helpful as the choice of an expressive coding mood or neat use of indentation or brackets may be. The code actually says no more than the network distinguishes. To conclude, network analysis would seem to have a useful role to play in educational research by providing a technique for dealing with bulk and the complexity of the accounts that are typically generated in qualitative studies. Then comes the discourse analysis. Discourse researchers explore the organization of ordinary talk or conversation and everyday explanations and the social actions performed in them. So collecting, transcribing, and analyzing discourse data constitutes a kind of psychological natural history of the phenomena in which discourse and analysts are interested. Discourses can be regarded as sets of linguistic material that are coherent in organization and content and enable people to construct meaning in social contexts. Discourses can be regarded as sets of linguistic material that are coherent in organization and content and enable people to construct meaning in social context. The emphasis on the construction of meaning indicates the action perspective of discourse analysis. Further, the focus on discourse and speech acts links this style of research to Habermas's critical theory. Well, Habermas argues that utterances are never simply sentences that are disembodied from context, but rather their meaning derives from the intersubjective context in which they are set. A speech situation has a double structure: the propositional content or the locutionary aspect. what is being said, and the performatory content, that is the illocutionary and perlocutionary aspect, means what is being done, the illocutionary, and what is achieved through the utterance, that would be the perlocutionary aspect. For Habermas, each utterance has to abide by the criteria of legitimacy, truth, rightness, sincerity, and comprehensibility. His concept of the ideal speech situation argues that speech, and for our purposes here, discourse should seek to be empowering and not subject to repression or ideological distortion. So his ideal speech situation is governed by several principles, not the least of which are mutual understanding between participants, freedom to enter a discourse, and equal opportunity to use speech acts, discussion to be free from domination, the movement towards consensus resulting from the discussion alone, and the force of argument alone rather than position of speakers. For Habermas, then, discourse analysis would seek to uncover, through ideology critique, the repressive forces which systematically distort communication. Various developments in discourse analysis have made important contributions to our understanding of children's thinking, challenging views of the child as a lone organism, constructing a succession of general models of the world as each new stage is mastered. Rather than treating children's language as representative of an inner cognitive world to be explored experimentally by controlling for a host of intruding variables, discourse analysts treat that language as action, as a situated discursive practice. By way of example, Edwards explores discourse data emanating from a visit to a greenhouse by 5-year-old pupils and their teacher to see plants being propagated and grown. His analysis shows how children take understanding of adults' meanings from the words they hear and the situations in which those words are used. And in turn, adults take from pupils' talk not only what they might mean, but also what they could and should mean. Well, what Edwards describes as the discursive appropriation of ideas is illustrated in the next slide. So here is an example of the concepts in children's talk. So that's a conversation between a student, Sally, and a teacher, and some other pupils. In the extreme left column, you have the line numbers from the data collected, and these are the participants in the middle column, and on the right, that is the conversation. Sally: cuttings can grow to plants. Okay, writing: cuttings can grow instead of saying to. To plants. Plants you can say grow. You wrote Christina. And so I said, oops, thank you. I'll do this again. Cutting can grow into plants. That's also good. Teacher says, what is a cutting, Christina? A cutting is, I don't know. Who knows what a cutting is besides Sally? Sam. It's when you cut off a piece of a plant. Exactly. And when you cut off a piece of a plant, what do you then do with it to make it grow? If you leave it, put it in a soil. Well, sometimes you can put it in soil and plant it. But what? Wait. What else could you put it in? Put it in a pot. Pot with soil. Or there's another way. I know another way. Wait. Sam, do you know? No. Dirt. No, it doesn't have to do with S. It's not a solid. It's a liquid. What liquid? Water. Right. So that is a conversation taking place between the teacher and a few students. So data collected like this and how to make sense of the one is the job of the discourse analyst. So discourse analysis requires a careful reading and interpretation of textual material, with interpretation being supported by the linguistic evidence. The inferential and interactional aspects of discourse and discourse analysis suggest the need for the researcher to be highly sensitive to the nuances of language. In discourse analysis, as in qualitative data analysis, the researcher can use coding at an early stage of analysis, assigning codes to the textual material being studied. This enables the researcher to discover patterns and broad areas in the discourse. With this achieved, the researcher can then re-examine the text to discover intentions, functions, and consequences of the discourse, examining the speech act functions of the discourse, for example, to import information, to persuade, to accuse, to censor, to encourage, etc. By seeking alternative explanations and the degree of variability in the discourse, it is possible to rule out rival interpretations and arrive at a fair reading of what was actually taking place in the discourse in its social context. So the application of discourse analysis to our understanding of classroom learning processes is well exemplified in another study by Edwards and Mercer 87. Rather than taking the classroom talk as evidence of children's thought processes, the researchers in that study explore it as contextualized dialogue with the teacher. The discourse itself is the educational reality, and the issue becomes that of examining how teacher and children construct a shared account, a common interpretative framework for curriculum knowledge and for what happens in the classroom. Overriding asymmetries between teachers and pupils, Edwards 91 concludes, both cognitive in terms of knowledge and interactive in terms of power impose different discursive patterns and functions. Indeed, Edwards 1980 suggests that teachers control classroom talk very effectively, reproducing asymmetries of power in the classroom by telling the students when to talk, what to talk about, and how well they have talked. So discourse analysis has been criticized for its lack of systematicity, for its emphasis on the linguistic construction of a social reality, and the impact of the analysis in shifting attention away from what is being analyzed and towards the analysis itself. That is the risk of losing the independence of phenomena. Discourse analysis risks reifying discourse. One must not lose sight of the fact that the discourse analysis itself is a text, a discourse that in turn can be analyzed for its meaning and inferences, rendering the need for reflexivity to be high. Edwards and Westgate show what substantial strides have made in recent years in the development of approaches to the investigation of classroom dialogue. Some methods encourage participants to talk, others wait for talk to emerge, and sophisticated audio-video techniques record the result by whatever method is achieved. The sculptured dialogue is reviewed, discussed, and reflected upon. Moreover, the reviewing, discussing, and reflecting is usually undertaken by researchers. It is they generally who read between the lines and within the gaps of classroom talk by way of interpreting the intentionality of the participating discussor. Now move on another approach, and that is analyzing the social episodes. A major problem in the investigation of that natural unit of social behavior that is called the social episode has been the ambiguity that surrounds the concept itself and the lack of an acceptable taxonomy by which to classify an interaction sequence on the basis of empirically quantifiable characteristics. Several quantitative studies have been undertaken in this field. For example, McVitie 57, Magnuson 71, Akihama and Magnuson 1973 use factor analysis and linkage analysis respectively, while Peeves and Secord and Peeves 74 and Fogus use multidimensional scaling and cluster analysis in social episodes. The free commentary method that Secord and Peeves 74 recommend as a way of probing for explanations of people's behavior lies at the very heart of ethnographical skills. In the example of ethnographic research that follows, one can detect the attempt of the researcher to get below the surface data and to search for the deeper, hidden patterns that are only revealed when attention is directed to the ways that group members interpret the flow of events in their lives. Heath questioning at home and at school. Heath's study of misunderstandings existing between black children and their white teachers in classrooms in the south of the United States brought to light teachers' assumptions that pupils would respond to language routines and the uses of language in building knowledge and skills just as other children. Specifically, Heath 82 sought to understand why these particular children did not respond just as others did. Her research involved exciting explanations from both the children's parents and teachers. "We don't talk to our children like you folks do," the parents observed when questioned about their children's behavior. Those children, it seemed to Heath, were not regarded as information givers or as appropriate conversational partners for adults. That is not to say that the children were excluded from language participation. They did in fact participate in a language that he describes as rich in style, speakers, and topics. Rather, it seemed to the researcher that the teacher's characteristic mode of questioning was to pull attributes of things out of context, particularly out of the context of books, and name them queens, elves, police, red apples. The parents did not ask these kinds of questions of their children, and the children themselves had their own ways of reflecting such questions, as the example shows. Okay, this is the answer of a 9-year-old boy who was directed to his teacher when she persisted in interrogating him about the story he had just completed in his reading group. Teacher says, "What is the story about?" And children silence. Teacher, "Oh, that's who is the story? Who is the story talks about?" Again silence. Teacher, "Who is the main character? What kind of story is it?" And child, "And nobody can talk about things being themselves." The boy was saying, "There's no way anybody can talk about things being about themselves." So he elicited both parents' and teachers' accounts of the children's behavior and their apparent communication problems. Her account of accounts arose out of periods of participation and observation in classrooms and in some of the teachers' homes. So the parents and teachers' divergent views on children's communicative competence. But the parents think the teachers won't listen. "My kid, he too scared to talk, 'cause nobody play by the rules he know. At home I can't shut him up." And Miss Davis, she complained about Ned not answering back. He say she asked dumb questions she already know about. And teacher's perspective, they don't seem to be able to answer even the simplest questions. I would almost think some of them have a hearing problem. It is as though they don't hear me ask a question. I get blank stares to my questions, yet when I am making statements or telling stories which interest them, they always seem to hear me. The simplest questions are the ones they can't answer in the classroom, yet on the playground they can explain a rule for a ball game or describe a particular kind of bait with no problem. Therefore I know they can't be as dumb as they seem in my class. I sometimes feel that when I look at them and ask a question, I am staring at a wall, can't break through. There's something there. Yet in spite of all the questions I ask, I'm never sure I've got them through to what's inside that wall, the teacher's version. In particular, she focused upon the ways in which the children learn to use language to satisfy their needs, ask questions, transmit information, and convince those around them that they were competent communicators. This involved Heath in a much wider and more intensive study of the total fabric of life in Tracton, the southern community in which the research was located. She comments that she was able to collect data from a wide range of contexts and situations, tracking children longitudinally and in several contexts, taking care to record language used and the social context of the language and the communicative competence of the participants. Well, there are certain problems in gathering and analyzing accounts. The importance of the meaning of events and actions to those who are involved in them is now generally recognized in social research. The implications of the ethnogenic stance in terms of actual research techniques, however, remain problematic. Mendel discusses a number of ambiguities and shortcomings in the ethnogenic approach, arising out of the multiplicity of meanings that may be held for same behavior. Most behavior, Mendel observes, can be assigned meanings, and more than one of these may very well be valid simultaneously. It is fallacious, therefore, he argues, to insist upon determining the meaning of an act. Nor can it be said that the task of interpreting an act is done when one has identified one meaning of it, or the one meaning that the researcher is pleased to designate as the true one. A second problem that Mendel raises is to do with actors, meanings as sources of bias. How central a place, he asks, sought to be given to actors' meanings in formulating explanations of events? Should the researcher exclusively and invariably be guided by these considerations? To do so would be to ignore a whole range of potential explanations which few researchers would wish to see excluded from consideration. So these are far-reaching, difficult issues, though by no means intractable. What solution does Mendel propose? First, we must specify to whom when asking what acts and situations mean. Second, researchers must make choices and take responsibility in the assignment of meanings to acts. Moreover, problem formulations must respect the meaning of the act to us, the researchers. Third, explanation should respect the meanings of acts to the actors themselves, but need not invariably be centered around these meanings. So Mendel's plea is for the usefulness of an outside observer's account of a social episode alongside the explanations that participants themselves may give of the event. A similar argument is implicit in McIntyre and McLeod's justification of objective, systematic observation in classroom settings. And their case is presented in this slide. Well, that's not very clear. We move on to look at what are the strengths of ethnogenic approach. The advantages of the ethnogenic approach to the educational researcher lie in the distinctive insights that are made available to her or him through the analysis of accounts of social episodes. The benefits to be derived from the exploration of accounts are best seen by contrasting the ethnogenic approach with a more traditional educational technique such as survey. So there is a good deal of truth in the assertion of the ethnogenically oriented researcher that approaches that employs survey techniques such as the questionnaire take for granted the very things that should be treated as problematic in an educational study. Too often the phenomena that ought to be the focus of attention are taken as given, that is, they are treated as the starting point of the research rather than becoming the center of the researcher's interest and effort to discover how the phenomena arose or came to be important in the first place. Numerous educational studies, for example, have identified the incidence and the duration of disciplinary infractions in school. Only relatively recently, however, has the meaning of classroom disorder as opposed to its frequency and type been subjected to intensive investigation. Unlike the survey, which is a cross-sectional technique that takes its data at a single point in time, the ethnogenic study employs an ongoing observational approach that focuses upon processes rather than products or the outcomes. Thus, it is the process of becoming deviant in school which would capture the attention of the ethnogenic researcher rather than the frequency and type of misbehavior among K types of ability in children located in N kinds of schools. So the last point would be about the on the stories. A comparatively neglected area in educational research is the field of stories and storytelling. Bauman suggests that stories are oral literature whose meanings, forms, and functions are situationally rooted in cultural contexts, scenes, and events which give meaning to action. This recalls Brunner, who, echoing the interpretive mode of educational research, regards much action as storied text, with actors making meaning of their situations through narrative. So stories have a legitimate place as an inquiry method in educational research. Toddy, 1997, suggests that as an extension to interviews, stories, like biographies, are rich in authentic, live data. They are, she avers, an unparalleled method of reaching practitioners' mindsets. Toddy, 97, provides a fascinating report on stories as data sources for educational management research as well as for gathering data from young children. Toddy indicates how stories can be analyzed using, for example, conventional techniques such as categorizing and coding of content, thematization, concept building. In this respect, stories have their place alongside other sources of primary and secondary documentary evidence, such as case studies and biographies. They can be used in ex post facto research, historical research, as accounts, or in action research. In short, they are part of the everyday battery of research instruments that are available to the researcher. The rise in the use of oral history as a legitimate research technique in social research can be seen here to apply to educational research as well. Although they might be problematic in that verification is difficult unless other people are present to verify events, stories being rich in the subjective involvement of the storyteller offer an opportunity for the researcher to gather authentic, rich, and respectable data. Well, that was all about ethnogenic approach, in which we discussed accounts and other forms of qualitative type of research in an educational context, and data can be gathered and interpreted in different forms like social episodes, discourse analysis, and the stories or the narratives, which are established ways of collecting data and interpreting. Well, that is the end of this topic and this session. Thank you very much, and goodbye till next lecture.